We'll start. Good morning to all of you. The slide is visible, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So today, in fact, this session and the next session, actually, it's a couple of sessions. We need to take a small detour from the topic of airports to something which is closely related. In fact, it's laid out the same way in the syllabus also. So the next couple of topics that we talk about is logistics and the quality of logistics and various systems related to logistics. Now, how this fits into the overall scheme of the portion or the syllabus is that uh, we are going to next discuss about cargo cargo handling, particularly with the operation focus on the operations that are that should take place at the airport. So cargo handling, cargo movements as applied to the airport is what we are going to discuss next. So prior to that, discussion on logistics, various systems for it, quality, etc., are included in the syllabus because cargo movement is a part of an integral part. In fact, in many instances, is an integral part of the overall system of logistics. So that's the reason why we first discuss about logistics, the issues or a cursory view at the different complexities associated with that, the various systems available for it, and what are the various factors that govern the overall performance of logistics. So that's how we are going, and we'll also address some of the basic aspects of a case study which was focused on improving the logistics. So this will be the scope of what we are going to discuss in at least a couple of sessions before we talk about cargo. Okay, so with that background, we now move on to logistics. Logistics, the term is quite familiar, and I'm sure that you're all familiar with that, and you even know the technical implementation of, like the implication of it. From the engineering perspective, logistics refers to the movement, storage, and flow of goods, services, and information within the overall supply chain. We'll come to the term supply chain next, but just focus on what is mentioned about logistics. It's a movement, storage, and flow of goods, services, and information. So it's not just goods, of course. Movement of goods or transportation of goods from one place to another is probably the most one of the most complex aspects of related to logistics. Uh, but it's not just limited to that. Movement of services. Services invariably includes movement of people if required, availing personal attention when and where required, and of course the movement of information that is getting more and more up to date and more modern with time, the passage of information. So the flow of goods, availability of services, transfer of information within the overall supply chain, and the various systems required for it, which includes the monitoring, the tracking, the ensuring the timely delivery, etc., is part of logistics. So, in a business sense, it's a man. The basically logistics is closely related to the term of management. So, logistics is, or management of logistics is, the management of flow uh, uh, of materials between the point of origin and the point of consumption to meet the requirements of customers. Now, in that second point, the sub-bullet, the definition is focused on the movement of goods, movement of materials. But as we have just seen, logistics in a larger perspective relates to movement of materials, services, as well as information. But then probably the most complex aspect of it is movement of goods, which requires more investment, more attention and more follow all through the process of supply and delivery. Apparently, the word comes from a French word used in army, logistic. I don't know actually how it is pronounced. Logistic probably. I don't know. French, I think, is a phonetic language, so G may be pronounced as I'm not sure about it. Anyway, it comes from the French word, which was originally used to describe the planning required for an army to reach from one point to another. So probably it was restricted to the movement of army, the army personnel from one point to another at the possibly at the time of a war. So that's where so basically it fundamentally it means movement from one place to another of all the resources which are required for meeting a particular task or accomplishing a particular task. So that's where the business term logistics apparently comes from. An often quoted explanation or more like a detailed definition for the logistics, or actually managing the logistics, is having or ensuring the right item in the right quantity at the right time, at the right place, at the right price, in the right condition to the right customer. Now, the appropriateness of each of these is important. You require whatever is required, so the right item, and you require it in the correct, proper quantity, and exactly when it is required. So the right time and where it is required, the right place, and also it should be at a competent price. I mean, it should be a reasonable price, so should be at the correct price and in good condition, which probably which actually relates to the quality of the supplied item, and it should be in the place where it is to be consumed or used for the person who requires it. So ensuring all this, ensuring appropriateness at the each stage or each of these factors, right from the item to the customer, ensuring the appropriateness of the material, the quantity, the quality, the place of delivery, the time of delivery, the cost, and the person to be handed over to, etc., is what is required, is the sole objective or the core objective of logistics management. No, the logistics actually is closely related to supply chain. So we have, I guess we have seen that word already, the term supply chain, when we try to define logistics, movement, storage, and flow of goods, services, information within the overall supply chain. So there's a larger scheme, larger picture, which is the supply chain. So these two words are so closely interlinked, not only in their implication, but also in the real-time application of them, the real-time use of them. So, so we need to also look at what is meant by, or what is formally defined as the supply chain. It's an entire system of operations which produces, delivers a product or service from the very beginning stage of sourcing the raw materials to the final delivery to the end users. So a supply chain completes its task when an intended object or intended service reaches the end user. So that's a completing point. Where does it start? In the case of material or in the case of goods, it starts from the the very beginning, where the source of the raw material required to produce that good is identified. So from the very point of identification of source of the raw material to transferring to a unit where it can be manufactured to the or converted to the good, that should be this one, and then stored and then eventually transferred, delivered to the customer, the whole processes the key of the chain of processes that completes this supply is referred to as supply chain. So when I just mentioned it in terms of material, the same way for services also. Identifying where it is available and then availing it eventually to the end user. So the whole chain is referred to as supply chain. It requires, again, from an engineering production perspective, it lays out all the aspects of the production process at each stage. So when you say management of the supply chain, or when you talk about design of a supply chain, or when we consider monitoring of monitoring and tracking of a supply chain, it involves each aspect of the complete production process, starting from raw materials, identification of raw materials, to the delivery of good to the finished good to the end user. So which means that it includes information that is being communicated, the resources that are transferred to useful materials. So resources, natural resources, that is the raw materials, and transformed, that is they go through an extensive manufacturing process, maybe refinement, manufacturing process, finishing, etc., and then become as a material which can be delivered. So they gets transformed to the useful materials, and the human resources required at each stage of it, and then the finished product, all through the stage where the finished product or the final service reaches the end customer. So this is what is meant by supply chain. Generic example for that. Generic example means from an engineering perspective, from the manufacturing perspective, the starting from raw materials to the finished goods. It typically involves these stages. First is sourcing and extraction of raw materials. Sourcing, that is identifying appropriate sources where it is abundantly available, and extraction by means which are sufficient, or which can ensure sufficient quantity as well as quality of the materials which can go to the production stage. So identification and sources and extraction of the materials, and then transfer of the materials to a supplier who is a wholesaler for the supplier. Now this is a generic example. You in all these ones you may not have the same sequence, but in some you may have even more steps in between. So just take this as a typical process. So first was identifying the material, extracting it, and then then the next is ensuring sufficient logistics, say means of transportation of the raw materials to a supplier of raw materials who does the wholesale supply of the material. And then the materials from the wholesaler goes to a manufacturer, or battery of manufacturers, so many of them actually, and which makes sure that, or the manufacturers make sure that the materials or the raw materials go through the procured refinement, and each process that should take place to make it a finished product. And then again, the finished product goes to a wholesale distributor. So the first wholesaler that we talked about was a wholesaler for the raw materials. What we are now talking about is the wholesaler for the finished product. So from the manufacturer, it goes to the wholesale seller where it is stored and distributed further to the retailers. Then it goes to the retailers who actually deliver it to the customer with appropriate outlets of distribution. So the retailer eventually sells the product to the customers at an outlet. So this actually completes the cycle. So once the customer gets it, then the supply chain is completed. But then is not just completing, is going to be a repeating cycle, because it is certainly not going to be a one-off demand and one-off supply. So there is going to be repeated demand for it from the same customer as well as many other customers. So going through this process again and again is going to be a cyclic nature. So this is an example for a supply chain which refers to, or which pertains to, the supply of an engineering material or engineering product, a finished product to a customer. So right from the identification of source to the delivery of finished good to the product to the customer is the entire processes related to the supply chain, which is going to repeat by itself. So let's just look at this schematic representation of it. First thing is the demand. Let's though it is not written here, the first step here it says is supply chain begins with sourcing and extraction. That is correct, but then what is the need for it? The need for it is the demand from the customer. So when something is required in the market, and then the search for the pursuit for how to make it, how to get the materials, how to refine them, etc. start. So the whole thing starts with a demand, so the very basic step is the natural resources, the raw materials, or raw materials from the natural resources, and then you need to have a transportation in most cases of the raw material. So that's where we come again. Logistics is the first step, and then it goes to wholesaler of raw materials, and then the wholesaler again makes use of logistics to transfer it or to sell that to or to avail that to a manufacturer. The manufacturer completes all the processes and makes the finished product, and the finished product is sent to the a distributor. Actually, a distributor means, so like again, a wholesaler for the finished product. So here you have the wholesaler for the raw materials. Here you have distributor is the wholesaler for the finished products. And then the wholesaler also relies on logistics support to reach that to a retailer. And eventually the retailer interfaces with the customer at the shop and sells it for a price. So this is where it ends. But then it's not an absolute end to the whole requirement, because the customer or other customers, the same customer again will have demand for it. So the whole thing again repeats like a cycle. So this is the cycle of supply chain that is followed in a typical engineering product. Anything to discuss further or to comment on what we have discussed so far? No, okay. Then please again look at that. The term logistics is coming repeatedly in this schematic. That's important, because remember that we started from logistics. Now we are trying to see how logistics fits into the overall scheme of supply chain, and even more fundamentally, our eventual interest is on cargo and the handling of cargo at the airport. So how cargo fits into the scheme of things related to logistics is what we are eventually going to discuss. And then as a precursor to that, we are now looking at how logistics itself fits into the larger scheme of production chain. So that's kind of subject protocol that we are following. Okay, so this is an example for a manufacturing company or an engineering product. Whereas a similar sketch or similar presentation can be done for more modern systems of supplies, like that of an e-commerce company, like say Amazon or Flipkart, etc. Which we know is like it works with the basic interfacing between the customer and the supplier in terms of or the e-commerce company. The interface is not a shop; it's a website. Okay, so that website sells various products across all categories, and then we know there are separate or focused websites for electronic goods, for clothes, etc., for dress materials, etc. So, but then a more generic one like Amazon, Flipkart, etc., sells various types of products, and then a customer. Then the whole thing starts again with the demand from a customer. Customer places an order for a product, and that gets product that gets also the customer makes use of the interface and uses uh, options like placing it in a cart, etc. And then it's processed at the e-commerce company's side, and then payment transaction is also integral to that, which is usually done with a related company with which works in the in financial sector, and then of course they interface with the banks. So the customer completes the process of payment by using the interfacing with his or her account or in the bank, etc., bank or whatever means of paying the making the payment. And then when the when the placing of the order is complete, then the order goes into a warehouse where the materials are stored or the products are stored. So that's when they give you an information that this has been packed or is being packed, etc. So the warehouse receives the order and ensures the product is ready for delivery. So at that point, they should ensure that the required product in the required condition, required number, the quantity, and quality that meets the requirements of the customer is available and is made ready for supply. And warehousing by itself, we'll also be discussing a little bit about warehousing. It can be in-house or it can be outsourced. So the e-commerce company may have their own warehouse systems, or it may be an entirely independent company with which this e-commerce company has a deal. So they can use warehousing as a third-party logistics provider. And then it goes to from the warehouse, it goes to the shipping company again. Shipping can be again an in-house logistic provision, or it can be a third party with whom the e-commerce company has a deal. So at each stage, outsourcing is possible. Many are making use of it. Some are doing it on their own. They're doing it by themselves. Anyway, the customer is not worried about whether the warehousing is done by the e-commerce company, the transport, the shipping or the transport is done by the warehouse company or a third party, etc. But eventually, the timely delivery of the finished product, the required product in the required quality and quantity, is what's the requirement of the customer. And so that is what is to be ensured all through the process, that the package finally arrives at the customer's doors at the time that is promised. So this again completes the cycle, and as we know, this is again cycle because there will be repeated demands from the same customer, other customers, etc., and the whole thing is going to be repeating. So we just look at it once again. The customer, the demand from the customer goes to the e-commerce website, and then it relies on logistics to reach the products, the product, the to here in this step. Just to highlight that in this step. Logistics refers to the logistics or movement of information than material, because what we are talking about is the moment, this one between the e-commerce website and the product orders. So what requires here is information or logistics related to, say, the payment method and the source of payment, the transaction with the deposit in the account, or whatever card or whatever system that they are going to follow. So this is more like a service logistics or information logistics than material movement. So once that is completed, the product, the order is placed, and then again the order is given to the or rather information is given to the warehouse. From the warehouse, there should be again movement. Here you have real material movement from the warehouse to the shipping center, where it goes to the supplier, actually the person who actually takes it out for delivery, etc. So in between, you may or may not have multiple places of storage, which is probably not necessary in most cases, but you may have as well. But then most commonly you will have the shipping out from a warehouse through following the logistics, and then eventually reaching the person who is in charge of, who is responsible for delivery. And then it depends on that person, his or her means of transport to reach to the customer, and eventually it gets delivered at the doorstep of the customer. So this is how it gets completed. The essential elements may be similar as in the case of a classical product chain, but then the nature of them, how they are actually operated, will be different in the case of e-commerce systems. Anyway, in all these, we can see the repeated or the reliance of the whole thing on various types of logistics and the systems that provide logistics that help meet those. So in the whole scheme of supply chain management, now we see where logistics management fits in, and where eventually the elements that relate to the distribution of them fit in. So in fact, cargo movement actually is coming into the or the relation of the whole thing on cargo movements is because cargo is a means for air cargo is a means for distribution. So that's where we come from into, and we see that distribution is a part of logistic management. Logistic management itself is a part of supply chain management, and the various steps involved in it are listed here: sourcing, procurement, manufacturing, coordination, integration of supply and demand management. That is ensuring that there is a balance between the demand in the market and the rate of manufacturing and refining of or the extraction and refining of raw materials, etc., so that there is no excess of materials and there is no shortage of materials. So this is all part of the supply chain management. Logistics management involves inventory management. Inventory means ensuring that there is adequate stock at any point of time, and at the same time there is not too much of stock which may lead to perished goods, or goods which are sort of outdated, or extra warehousing, that is the inventory space being overutilized, etc. So to avoid all that, you should have appropriate management of the inventory system. We'll be again discussing some of the options related to inventory systems separately. and then supply the transportation, planning, and outsourcing wherever outsourcing is required, as we have discussed already. Say warehousing can be outsourced or it can be within in-house. Similarly, transport can be outsourced or can be in-house, etc. And the overall management of fleet of goods. So all this is part of logistics management. And then you have distribution where it requires storing at the warehousing, control of inventory, ensuring the right quantity there, then administration of the order, that is ensuring that the order gets registered appropriately and gets responded to in a prompt manner. The transportation, handling the required materials, data processing, etc., which also involves like ensuring the information regarding the supply, the inventory, and the forecast for new demands, etc., and all the required communications. So these are the three steps of it, or the three phases of it, or three aspects of it: the supply chain management, which includes logistics management, which in turn includes distribution. I think we will go to a case study which sort of highlights how some of these can be improved in the overall interest of the efficiency and the promptness of the entire supply chain system. We'll do that in the next session. I'll stop here. If there are questions, I'll take them right now. Or anything that you want to comment on. No questions. I guess several people joined late, so I'll just repeat what I said in the beginning about why we are discussing logistics all on a sudden. We are the next topic in this one. Actually, next topic in the syllabus itself is logistics and quality related to logistics, but it relates to the overall scheme of airports and activities of airports through cargo handling. So what we eventually will go after this couple of sessions is on matters related to cargo handling. So since cargo is a part of logistics, that's there's one module or a series of topics which are listed in the syllabus related to logistics. So that's the reason why we are now talking about logistics, the management of logistics, the supply chain management, etc., which all eventually lead us to the importance of air cargo, and then we'll focus on the aspects related to cargo handling with focus on the activities at the airport. So that's a background of this topic. Okay, then thank you. If there are no questions, we'll stop for the session. We'll meet in the afternoon. Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Bye.